The sky of Varney shook under the weight of human ships. Their engines roared like thunder. Dust and ash rose in great waves as the three massive carriers lowered toward the main landing zone. Every soldier and citizen on the ground stopped to watch. Some were afraid, others were simply frozen. For a world left alone to die, the sight of those dark ships felt like the first breath after drowning. Tay stood at the command platform with General Moran. The sound of the engines echoed through the broken capital. Soldiers lined up near the perimeter. Their weapons were ready, but their hands shook. They had never seen a Deathworlder before. Many of them had only heard stories told in mining stations and trade ships. None of those stories were calm. Every story spoke of humans who lived on a world so dangerous that the entire galaxy avoided it. A place where storms tore mountains apart. A place where creatures could crush steel with their jaws. A place where survival itself was a war. The landing ramps opened with a deep mechanical growl. Warm air rushed out as thick armored figures stepped down. The first thing everyone noticed was their movement. Humans walked with solid steps. They did not rush. They did not hesitate. They moved as if nothing around them could break their focus. Their black and gray armor was scratched and marked by old battles. Their helmets were smooth, their visors dark. Heavy weapons hung at their sides. It looked like the storm itself had taken shape and learned to walk. Moran leaned closer to Terran. They look exactly like the stories. Terran nodded slowly. Yes, but they came. That is what matters. The lead human stopped in front of Terran and Moran. The helmet opened with a soft click. A woman stepped forward. Her face was strong and calm. Her eyes carried the weight of many wars. She looked at Terran as if measuring him without saying a word. Then she spoke in clear, galactic standard. I am Myra, Human Command Lead. We received your signal. We are here. Terran straightened his back. Commander Terran, of Varney's defense, we thank you for answering. No one else came. Myra gave a short nod. We heard your message. That was enough. Her voice carried no arrogance and no softness. It was steady like iron. She turned and gave a signal to her team. Behind her, rows of human soldiers spread across the landing zone. They carried heavy containers and mounted strange equipment on the ground. They moved fast but in perfect order. It was clear that this was not their first war. For them, battlefields were familiar ground. Moran whispered, They act like they own the place. Terran replied, No, they act like they know how to survive. A group of Varney's officers arrived to greet them. They tried to follow the usual steps of diplomatic welcome, but Mira raised her hand. No speeches. Show us your defense lines. Need to see your wall. We need to see your enemy. Terran led her through the broken streets toward the east wall. Along the way, Mira's soldiers followed quietly. They scanned every building and corner. Their helmets showed glowing lights as if reading the ground. Varney's soldiers watched them with mixed feelings. Fear and curiosity filled the air. When they reached the wall, the Kreth swarm was visible in the distance like a dark moving ocean. The insectoid creatures were gathering again. Their long legs scratched the ground. Their wings made a sharp sound. Terran pointed at them. They come every night. We push them back, but we lose more ground each time. Mira watched the swarm without emotion. She studied their pattern. She spoke to her team through a small device on her neck. Mark the movement. Map their tunnels. They are simple. They do not learn fast. Terran raised an eyebrow. Simple. They have destroyed entire cities. Mira looked at him. Yes, because you try to fight them like an army. They are not an army. They are a flood. You do not build walls against a flood. You control where it flows. Shh. She walked along the edge of the wall, her boots leaving clear prints in the dust. Her team followed and placed small metallic spheres on the ground. They were strange devices that hummed with a soft light. Ah! Mira then turned to Terran. How many soldiers do you have? Terran replied, less than 8,000. Most are tired. Supplies are low. The outer east line has fallen. Mira nodded. We will hold the east. We will build a moving front. Do not waste soldiers on static lines. Miran frowned. Moving front? Barely have enough men to hold the wall. Mira looked at her. We are not asking. We are telling you how we fight. Miran clenched her fists but said nothing. She saw the humans setting up their weapons. Their cannons were different. Instead of tall towers, they built low, rotating mounts. Their soldiers carried packs that looked heavier than an entire Varney's rifle station. They were not building defense. They were preparing to advance. Night fell fast. The swarm began to move again. The Kreth pushed toward the wall in a thick wave.
Ow.
Their clicking voices filled the air like a storm of knives. Varney's soldiers took their positions behind broken towers. Human soldiers stood in front of them without cover. Their armor glowed faintly under the red sky. Terran shouted orders through his cum. "Prepare all lines. Fire on my signal." Mira raised her hand. "Hold." The Kreth came closer. The Varney soldiers grew tense. They had never waited this long before opening fire. Era watched calmly. When the swarm crossed a certain invisible line, she dropped her hand. The human cannons roared at once. The ground shook. Lines of fire cut straight through the swarm. The Kreth, used to static walls, did not expect a sudden strike from the open field. The human formation moved forward in tight steps. They advanced as they fired. They cut the swarm into sections like a blade slicing water. Varna's soldiers stared in shock. They were used to falling back at this stage. But the humans did not step back. They kept pushing forward. Myra walked at the front line, as if she had done it 1,000 times. Her armor was marked with dust and blood, but she did not slow down. Terran joined the line with his men. He saw how the humans moved. Every step had a purpose. Every shot had a target. When one soldier reloaded, another covered. They fought like a single machine made of living parts. The Kreth swarms tried to surround them, but the humans turned and struck the weak points without fear. Hours passed. The night was filled with the sound of fire and broken wings. For the first time since the invasion began, the swarm did not reach the city. The ground before the wall was filled with the broken bodies of the Kreth. The human line stood firm. Their weapons still burned hot. Terran looked at Mira. Her face was calm, her breathing steady. She gave a short nod to her soldiers. They started pulling back in perfect order, not like a retreat, but like a well-planned step. When they reached the wall again, the defenders broke into whispers. They had seen something they never thought possible. Miran approached Mira. "You pushed them back?" "How?" Mira answered simply. "We grew up fighting worse than this. On our world, everything tries to kill us. We learn to fight like storms. We do not run from floods. We shape them." Terran watched her with respect. "You just gave my people hope." Mira shook her head. "Do not give them hope in me. Give them strength in themselves. We will fight beside you, but this is your home. You must learn fast." Over the next days, the humans built a new kind of defense. Instead of walls, they created moving positions. Instead of hiding in towers, they advanced in waves. They set traps underground and above ground. They moved through the ruins like hunters. Every night the Kreth came, and every night they were pushed back. The people of Varnes began to change too. At first, they only watched the humans. Then they began to copy their movements. Human soldiers trained Varney soldiers in the streets. They showed them how to move in pairs, how to keep calm under pressure, how to aim not at the mass but at the center. They taught them how to think like survivors, not like victims. Terran spent long hours with Mira at the war table. Maps covered the room. Human and Varney symbols mixed together. Their strategies slowly merged. It was no longer two armies. It was one. One evening, as they watched the swarm retreat again, Mira turned to Terran. "The Kreth do not fear walls, but they will learn to fear us." Terran answered, "You have changed the war." Mira replied, "No. You changed it by calling for help. We only answered." That night, the people of Varney celebrated for the first time in months, not because the war was over, but because they had seen the Kreth fall back. Children looked up at the human ships in the sky with wide eyes. Soldiers who had once stood in silence now laughed softly. The fear that had covered their hearts was not gone, but it was weaker. Mira Ann stood on the balcony and watched the city lights return in small patches. She looked at Mira, who stood below with her soldiers. The human commander did not join the celebration. She checked her weapons and prepared for the next fight. Mira was not someone who celebrated early. She was someone who made sure there would be something left to celebrate. Terran joined her on the balcony. "You look thoughtful," he said. Mira Ann answered, "I was wrong about them. They're not just stories. They're warriors." Terran looked at the landing zone, where human ships rested like silent guardians. "They are Deathworlders, but they are on our side." The night on Varnes was red and full of smoke. Great towers that once touched the clouds were now only black skeletons reaching for a sky covered in ash. The Kreth swarm moved across the plains like a living sea. Every movement of the swarm carried a sound that made the air itself heavy. People were running toward the underground shelters, holding on to children, carrying what little they could. The air smelled of burning metal and wet earth. Commander Terran stood at the edge of the old command balcony. His hands were locked behind his back. His armor was scratched, the color almost gone from too many battles. The old capital of Varnes lay behind him, broken but still standing. In front of him, the black mass of Kreth moved slowly, but with purpose. Every night they came closer. Every day the defenders lost more ground inside the command center below. Engineers worked with silent faces. Every console flashed a weak green light. The power lines were unstable. Communications were almost gone. Yet Terran stayed calm. He had seen enough wars to know when a planet was losing. What made him uneasy was not defeat itself, but the silence from the stars. Varnes had sent out its first plea for help months ago. Not one major power had answered. Taran walked down the metal steps to the main comm station. A young operator looked up, tired but still focused. "No new signals," she said before he could ask. "We sent another wave an hour ago. Still nothing." Terran looked at the galaxy map on the main screen. Green lights showed every place where their message had reached. All of them were silent. Varnes was alone. A soldier ran into the room. His boots echoed on the metal floor. "Commander," he said, breathing hard, "the outer wall is losing power. Kreth are moving closer on the east side." Terra nodded. "Hold the line for as long as possible. No hero moves. Fall back if needed. We cannot waste lives." The soldier saluted and ran back out. Terran turned to the operator. "Send it again," he said. "Use the old frequency too. Someone has to hear us." The operator did not speak. She only tapped the screen and sent the same message into the dark. A voice came from behind. "Why do you keep trying?" It was General Moran, an old friend of Terran. She had lost an eye in the first week of the invasion. Her armor was even more broken than his. "No one will come. Varnes is not worth the trouble to them. We are not a core world. We are not a power. They will not move their fleets for us." Terran looked at her with steady eyes. "Because someone must still listen. Because if we stop calling, then the stars will know we gave up. I will not let that happen." She gave a bitter smile. "You always were the stubborn one." The night passed slowly. Every hour the Kreth came closer. Their small drones swarmed through the broken streets. The defenders fought them off, but it was a losing game. Varnes was bleeding. The hospitals were full. Food was almost gone. At midnight, a loud alarm shook the command center. The operator shouted, "Incoming swarm from the south, 2,000 strong." Terran moved to the front. "Send Unit 4 and 5. Focus fire on the bridge. Do not let them break the line. If the bridge falls, the shelters are next." From the watch balcony, Terran saw the battle like a wave meeting a wall. Human-shaped soldiers in dark Varnes armor held their rifles steady. Bright blue flashes cut the night. The Kreth screamed in their strange, clicking voice and pushed forward. The soldiers fell one by one, but they held. Hours later, smoke covered the field again. The bridge still stood, but the soldiers were exhausted. Terran walked among them after the fight. They did not cheer. They simply breathed, drank water, and stared at the red sky. They knew they would fight again tomorrow. In the early light of the second sun, Terran returned to the comm station. The operator was asleep on the console. He was about to wake her when a soft sound filled the room. A signal blinked on the screen. For a second, Terran thought it was a mistake. Then the green light blinked again. The operator jumped up, confused but alert. What is that? Taryn leaned closer. The signal was weak but clear. It came from a point at the far edge of the galaxy map. A sector no major power used. A place that most ships avoided. The tag next to the signal was simple: Earth. Moran walked in at that moment and saw the blinking green light. You have to be joking, she said. That is a death world. You know the stories? No one goes there, and no one comes from there. Taryn stared at the signal, and yet they answered. The operator opened the message. It was short. It contained only 3 words. We are coming. The room went silent. Engineers and soldiers turned their heads. For months they had begged for help. For months they had heard nothing. Now, the only answer came from the most feared place in the galaxy. Moran crossed her arms. Do you really want them here? Deathworlders are not saviors. They are unpredictable. Some say they fight like they were born in storms. Some say they survive places that kill anyone else. What if they bring more chaos? Taryn did not look away from the green light. Then we let chaos fight chaos. If they are the only ones willing to come, we will welcome them. Our people deserve a chance. The signal grew stronger. A second message followed. This one carried flight data and coordinates. 3 human ships were on the way. Estimated arrival, 2 days. Word spread through the shelters and camps like fire. People whispered in fear and hope. No one knew what Deathworlders looked like up close. Some said they were giants. Some said they were wild. Others believed they were simply like everyone else but harder. Children asked if the Deathworlders would save them. Parents said maybe Tans stood on the balcony again that night. The swarm was quiet for once. The Kreth had pulled back to gather more strength. The stars above Varney's were still hidden behind smoke, but he imagined 3 ships cutting through the dark toward them. Moran joined him, her face half lit by the red fires below. I hope you know what you are doing, she said. Taya answered without turning. I do not. But I know what happens if we do nothing, and I will not let our world fall in silence. The next morning was harder. The Kreth returned with new swarms. The defenders were pushed closer to the center. The outer east wall finally fell. Explosions shook the ground. The shelters filled with screaming alarms. But even as the Kreth advanced, the people held to the single fact that changed everything. Help was coming. 2 days later, the dark sky above Varney's flashed with a bright white line. The old sensors screamed with warnings. 3 massive ships broke through the atmosphere at high speed. They did not match any known fleet design. Their hulls were heavy, marked by years of war. They had scars, but also power. Taya watched from the top platform as the ships slowed and hovered above the ground. The Kreth swarms shifted uneasily. Even they felt the change in the air. When the human ships opened their landing bays, the people of Varney's held their breath. The Deathworlders had arrived. Tan turned to Moran. The stars were silent, he said softly. But someone listened. Moran gave a short nod. Let us hope they are as strong as the stories say. Above them, the landing lights cut through the smoke. The heavy sound of engines shook the ground. Soldiers ran to their positions. The first shapes appeared at the edge of the platform. No one on Varney's knew what would happen next. But for the first time in many months, hope returned to the burning world. The sun rose behind the ruined towers of the capital. Ash floated slowly through the air like gray snow. The battle lines on the ground looked different now. Where once there had been broken walls and desperate defenses, there now stood a new front built with human precision. Heavy cannons were positioned in layered rows. Deep trenches were cut into the ground. Steel spikes and traps stretched far beyond the wall. Human and Varney soldiers moved together, their steps steady, their faces set with new purpose. The days of silent fear were over. Now the defenders waited for the swarm with fire in their hearts. Taryn stood on the high command tower, watching the formation below. The old tower was cracked but still held strong. From this height, he could see the wide dark plains beyond the city. He could see the swarm gathering again. The Kreth never stopped. They were like a storm that rebuilt itself after every strike. Their clicking sound filled the wind. Their wings beat like 1,000 drums. It was clear they would attack again with full force. General Moran joined. Terran, she carried a new rifle built by the humans and Varney's engineers together. It was heavy, but she held it with ease. Her face showed a calm that had not been there before. "They are moving in larger numbers," she said. Taya nodded. "Yes, Myra said this would happen. The Kreth adapt when they sense resistance. They want to crush us before our strength grows too much." Miran looked toward the distant black wave. "Then let them come. This time, we will not hide behind broken walls." Below them, the human commander Mira walked through the lines. She checked every unit personally. She spoke little, but every soldier she passed straightened their back. The humans respected her because she was a leader who stood in the front, not behind. The Varney soldiers respected her because she had given them something they thought was lost. She had given them a chance to fight with pride. A young Varney soldier named Leo stood in one of the front trenches. His armor was scratched, his hands dirty, but his eyes were sharp. He had fought many battles, but had never felt this ready. Beside him stood a human soldier named Ryan. Ryan was tall, his armor dented from past fights. He was loading his weapon with slow care. Leo glanced at him. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked. Ryan answered without looking up. "Fear is normal. What matters is what you do with it." He had heard many things about Deathworlders. Some said they were wild. Some said they felt no fear. But standing next to Ryan, he understood the truth. They were not fearless. They were strong because they learned to keep going even when afraid. Above the front line, the air was filled with the hum of human drones. They floated like silent hawks, scanning every corner of the field. Information from the drones flowed into the command center. The Kreth swarm was bigger than before. Thousands of black bodies moved in waves. Their mandibles clicked, their legs dug into the dirt, their wings beat against the wind. Mira's voice came through every communicator. "All units. The swarm is coming. Hold the line. No, step back. No mercy for the invader," the defenders answered as one. "Understood." The Kreth charge began as the sun reached its highest point. The swarm surged forward like a living tide. The ground shook with their movement. Dust rose in thick clouds. Terran could see their front wave from the tower. It stretched from one horizon to the other. He felt the same fear he had felt many times before, but this time there was something else inside him. He felt steel. The first human cannons opened fire. Lines of burning metal tore through the swarm. The explosions were sharp and clean. Kreth bodies fell and rolled under the feet of the creatures behind them. But the swarm did not slow. The Kreth climbed over their fallen. They rushed forward, their many legs cutting deep tracks into the ground. Human soldiers fired in tight formation. Varney's soldiers fired beside them, matching their rhythm. Ryan shouted orders to the soldiers in the front trench. "Aim for the chest, not the head. Bring them down fast." Leo followed the command. His rifle kicked against his shoulder again and again. Kreth bodies fell one after another. Still they came. Their numbers were huge, but the defenders did not falter. Behind the trenches, heavy flame projectors lit up. Waves of fire turned sections of the swarm into ash. Above the ground, drones released targeted strikes that split the enemy formation into smaller groups. Moran led a unit on the left flank. She moved like a hunter in the ruins. Her soldiers followed her without hesitation. They struck the Kreth from the side, cutting their movement. Mira led the right flank. She walked at the very front with her soldiers. Her armor was coated with dust, but she kept advancing. The Kreth tried to surround the defenders. The swarm spread out to both sides. But Mira had already planned for this. Hidden traps exploded under the enemy feet. Steel nets rose from the ground, tangling their legs. Artillery from the ships rained down with sharp precision. The swarm began to break apart. Terran left the command tower and joined the front line. He raised his rifle and stood beside the soldiers. He was a commander, but he had always believed in fighting with his people. His voice echoed through the comm. "Hold the ground. This is our home. No Kreth will pass. His words were not loud, but they spread like fire through the lines. Soldiers shouted as they fought. They no longer felt like prey. They felt like a storm meeting another storm. The Kreth brought their heavy beasts forward. Giant creatures with hard shells moved at the center of the swarm. Their steps cracked the earth. Their thick armor had once crushed the Varney's defenses like paper. Mira saw them coming. She raised her hand and gave a quick signal. Several human units broke formation and ran forward. They carried large cylinders on their backs and heavy lances in their hands. These were breachers trained for close combat with massive enemies. The breachers moved fast and fearless. They threw magnetic charges under the giant beasts. The explosions tore open the armored shells. The creatures screamed and fell. The swarm shuddered. Leo watched from the trench as the humans charged the giant beasts without flinching. His fear turned into fire inside his chest. He jumped from the trench and shouted for his unit to follow. Ryan looked at him once and then joined the charge. Soon a wave of Varney soldiers ran behind the humans. They struck at the Kreth with a strength they did not know they had. The battle burned on for hours. The field turned into a sea of broken bodies, burned wings, and smoking earth. The defenders did not give the swarm a single step. Every advance was met with a counter. Every push was met with a storm. The Kreth began to lose their shape. Their front lines broke. Their center faltered. Mira climbed onto a broken tank and raised her weapon. "Push them back," she shouted. "This is where they end." The human and Varney soldiers roared in answer. Their voices rolled over the battlefield like thunder. They moved as one line. They cut through the Kreth like a blade through soft wood. The swarm finally began to pull back. Their rear lines turned and ran toward the plains. For the first time since the invasion began, Kreth retreated from the capital. Tane stood on the smoking battlefield. His armor was covered in black dust. His weapon was hot in his hands. Around him, soldiers raised their rifles high. Some fell to their knees from exhaustion, but their faces carried something new. They carried victory. Miran approached him with a tired smile. "We did it," she said. Teren looked at the retreating swarm. "We did not do it alone." Mira walked up to them. Her armor was cracked, but she stood tall. She looked at the field without emotion. This was one battle. The swarm will return. They will bring more. But now they know we are not easy prey. Teren nodded. Yes. Now they know the Deathworlders are here. Leo walked by with Ryan. His rifle hung by his side. He was covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes burned bright. He had fought beside a Deathworlder and survived. More than that, he had fought like one. The night after the battle, defenders gathered on the broken plaza in the center of the city. Fires burned in barrels. Soldiers sat together, human and Varney side by side. No speeches were made. No songs were sung. It was a quiet kind of celebration, the kind that came after surviving something impossible. Miran sat near the fire and cleaned her rifle. Teren stood at the edge of the plaza and watched the sky. Mira stood a short distance away, speaking with her officers about the next moves. Even after victory, she did not rest. She planned for the next storm. Elio sat with Ryan and shared a piece of dry rationed bread. He laughed for the first time in many weeks. Ryan smiled slightly and said, "This is just the beginning." Elio nodded. "Then we will finish it together." Above them, the stars finally shone through the smoke. The Kreth had been pushed back. The city still stood. The people of Varnes had seen the strength of the Deathworlders. And in that strength they had found their own. The battle for Varnes was not over, but the balance had shifted. The swarm had met something it had never faced before. It had met the people of Earth. It had met those who grew strong in storms. It had met those who answered when no one else did. The smell of smoke still hung over the capital of Varnes. The great battle had ended, but the ground still bore deep scars. Burned craters and broken machines covered the plains outside the city. The Kreth swarm had been pushed back, but everyone knew they were not gone. The swarm never vanished after one defeat. It always returned. The difference now was that the defenders no longer felt weak. They had seen that the enemy could bleed. They had seen that they could fight like the Deathworlders. Tane walked along the main wall with Moran beside him. The early morning wind carried the sound of engines. Human drones flew above the ruined towers, scanning the horizon for movement. Soldiers worked together to rebuild the front trenches. Human and Varney's engineers reinforced the outer line. New weapons were mounted on metal plates. The defense was no longer a broken wall. It had become a living machine. Moran looked at the activity with pride. "I never thought we would see this day," she said. "They ran from us." Tehran nodded. "We have learned from the Deathworlders. Now we fight like them." Mira walked toward them with her helmet under her arm. Her black armor was repaired, but still carried the marks of battle. She spoke in her calm voice. "The swarm is moving again. They are gathering near the central hive. They will strike soon." Tehran asked. "How many?" "Many," Myra answered. "More than before. This time, they will bring their full force. They believe they can crush us in one blow. We will not let that happen." The war table was set up in the main square. Maps and live drone feeds filled the screens. Officers from both sides gathered around. Human officers spoke with clear and short words. Varney's officers listened carefully. Mira pointed at a large red mark on the map. "This is their hive cluster. It controls most of the swarm movement. If we break it, the swarm will lose control. This is what we call iron net. We surround the hive. We cut their movement. We strike from every side at once." Moran looked at the map. "That is far from the city. If we leave, we expose ourselves." Mira shook her head. "If we stay behind the walls, they will bring the fight here again and again. If we take the fight to them, we decide the battle. You have brave soldiers. We have the plan. Together we can do this." He knew the plan was dangerous. It would pull their forces away from the city and deep into enemy ground. But he also knew Mira was right. They could not hold the wall forever. The Kreth would keep growing until no wall could stop them. He placed his hand on the table. "We do it." Orders were sent across every unit. Soldiers prepared for the largest mission of the war. Human carriers loaded heavy weapons. Varney's transports lined the old landing zone. Drones circled high in the sky. For the first time, the defenders were not waiting. They were marching forward. Leo stood with Ryan at the edge of the staging ground. Their armor was scratched and patched. Their weapons were cleaned and ready. Around them, Human and Varney soldiers moved in tight formation. There was no fear on their faces now. Only focus. Ryan checked his weapon one last time. Leo did the same. Ryan said, "This is the big one." Leo nodded. "Then we give them everything." The attack began at night. The sky was black and heavy with clouds. The human ships moved above like silent shadows. Columns of soldiers advanced across the plain. No one spoke. The sound of their boots in the wind was all that could be heard. Far away, the Kreth hive glowed with a strange red light. It pulsed like a heart. It was alive. Mira led the central column. Tehran and Moran led the left and right flanks. The plan was simple. Humans and Varneys would close in from every side and surround the hive. The iron net would lock the swarm inside. Once the hive was trapped, they would strike hard and fast. As they neared the hive, Kreth patrols appeared. Small groups of insectoid creatures rushed toward the advancing soldiers. Human sharpshooters picked them off with precise shots. Varney's rifle units covered the sides. The swarm was fast, but the defenders were faster. Patrol after patrol fell without slowing the advance. Finally, the hive itself came into view. It was a massive structure made of hardened resin and stone. It rose from the ground like a black mountain. Streams of smaller creatures moved in and out of its tunnels. The air smelled of rot and heat. The sound was a constant low hum, like the beating of 1,000 wings. Mira gave the signal. The columns spread out like blades of a spear. Heavy cannons were placed in semicircles. Missile platforms locked onto the hive. Drones positioned themselves in the sky. The iron net was closing. The Kreth swarm realized too late what was happening. Their main force poured out of the hive. Thousands of bodies filled the plain. The ground shook like an earthquake. Mira lifted her rifle and shouted through the now. Sky exploded with light. Human and Varney's cannons opened fire at the same time. The ground in front of the hive turned into fire. Kreth fell in waves, but still they came. Their numbers were endless, but this time the defenders did not give them space to spread. Every path was blocked. Every flank was covered. It was a trap built with precision. Terran led the left flank, shouting orders as he moved through the line. Moran led the right flank with the same fire in her eyes she had once lost. Mira advanced straight down the center. Her soldiers moved with her like a single blade. The battle shook the earth. Ryan and Leo fought side by side again. Kreth claws scraped the ground around them. Leo aimed and fired at anything that moved too close. Ryan charged forward with heavy steps. Around them, other soldiers held the line. There was no fear. There was only the rhythm of battle. The Kreth tried to break through the circle. Their giant beasts attacked the flanks. But the humans had set traps before the battle began. The ground under the beasts exploded with hidden mines. The monsters fell before they could crush the lines. The swarm tried to push through the center, but Mira and her soldiers met them head-on. Their weapons cut through the black tide. Above the battlefield, the human ships hovered like iron giants. Their heavy cannons rained fire on the hive. The outer shell of the hive cracked under the bombardment. Pieces fell away, revealing glowing tunnels beneath. The Kreth screamed in their sharp, clicking language. Myra gave a new signal. Breacher units ran forward with explosives. They moved straight into the heart of the storm. Varney's units followed behind them, covering their advance. Leo found himself running with them. His heart pounded, but he did not slow down. Ryan ran beside him, shouting, "Keep moving." Explosions shook the night. The breachers planted charges at the base of the hive. The ground shook as the explosives tore open a giant hole in the wall. The swarm poured out in panic. Their coordination began to break. The iron net was working. Terran's voice came through the comm. "All units. Final push." Mira raised her rifle and shouted, "Forward." The defenders charged as one. Human and Varney soldiers stormed into the opening. The Kreth tried to close the gap, but their forces were scattered. Inside the hive, the tunnels twisted in strange patterns. The defenders moved in teams, clearing every passage. The Kreth fell back deeper into their nest. Moran led her unit through the upper tunnels. Terran moved through the lower levels. Mira pushed straight toward the core. Leo followed Ryan into a wide chamber glowing with red light. At the center of the chamber stood a massive queen creature. Its long legs and wings spread across the walls. Its eyes burned with hate. The queen roared, shaking the tunnel. Swarms of smaller creatures rushed to protect it. But the defenders were already in control. Artillery above struck the outer shell of the hive again. Drones targeted the queen's guards. Mira reached the chamber from the other side. Her soldiers surrounded the room. Mira lifted her weapon. "End this." The defenders opened fire with everything they had. The queen's scream echoed through the entire hive. Its wings shattered under the storm of bullets and fire. Terran's unit threw heavy charges at the core. Miran's team covered the upper tunnels. Ryan and Leo fired without stopping. The red light of the hive began to dim. The final explosion came when the charges went off. The queen fell. The walls cracked. The hum of the hive died. Outside, the swarm began to scatter. Without their queen, their movements lost all shape. The iron net closed fully as the defenders pushed the last Kreth out into the plains. When the smoke cleared, the hive was burning. The defenders stood covered in dust and sweat, their weapons still hot. Terran walked out of the tunnel and looked at the dark sky. Moran stood beside him with her rifle lowered. Ryan helped Leo stand. Mira walked through the smoke with her soldiers behind her. Tern looked at her and said, "It is over." "No, this hive is finished. The war is not." But today, the tide turned. The defenders returned to the city with their heads high. For the first time since the war began, the swarm was not the hunter. It was the hunted. News spread through the shelters before the sun rose. Children ran through the halls shouting that the hive had fallen. Soldiers walked through the streets like living legends. Tarn stood on the command balcony once more. The city still burned in some places, but the sound of panic was gone. In its place was the sound of rebuilding. The people had learned to fight. The people had learned to stand. Miran leaned against the railing. I never thought I would live to see this. Taryn looked at the stars. We sent a plea for aid, they answered. Behind them, Myra and her soldiers prepared for the next mission. They were Deathworlders. The night after the fall of the hive was quiet. It was the first quiet night Varney's had known in many months. The sky above the city was clear. The smoke from the battle had faded. Broken buildings stood like silent watchers over the streets. Fires were out. The people walked without fear for the first time since the swarm had come. Children stepped out of the shelters. They stared at the stars. The air was still heavy with the smell of war, but it no longer felt like the end. It felt like the beginning. Taryn stood on the main balcony of the command tower. He looked down at the city. Lights glowed in the windows again. People carried tools instead of weapons. Soldiers moved through the streets to help rebuild walls and roofs. They were tired, but their faces carried a quiet strength. The world that had once waited for rescue now stood with its back straight. The Kreth had not broken them. The Deathworlders had taught them to fight. Mira walked up beside him. Her armor was scratched and dirty, but she carried herself like a commander who never bowed to any storm. She rested her hands on the railing and looked at the city below. Taryn turned toward her and said, "They are free because of you." Myra shook her head. "No, they are free because they chose to stand. We gave them a plan. They fought for their world." Taryn was silent for a moment. He knew she spoke the truth. When the humans had first arrived, Varney's had been broken. Its armies had lost their hope. But the Deathworlders had brought something the swarm had never faced before. They brought the will to fight without retreat. They brought fire where there had been only fear. Miran joined them on the balcony. She wore her soldier's uniform, not the polished one she had worn before the war. She carried no medals. She carried only a rifle on her back and the marks of many battles. She said, "The people will remember this day for many generations." Mira answered, "They should not remember us. They should remember their strength." Below them, the Varney's Defense Council gathered in the main square. Banners were raised, not as a show of power, but as a sign of unity. Human officers stood beside Varney's commanders. No one gave long speeches. There was no need. Everyone already knew what had been won. Ryan and Leo walked through the crowd. They had fought side by side from the first landing to the last push. Ryan carried his helmet under his arm. Leo carried a small flag with the mark of Varney's. They were tired, but they walked with pride. The people cheered as they passed. Children ran to them and handed them flowers. Ryan did not know what to say, so he just smiled. Leo waved the small flag. An old farmer stepped forward and spoke to them. "You came when no one else did. You stood with us when everyone else turned away. We will not forget." Ryan answered in a soft voice, "You stood with us too." "We were not alone out there," Farmer nodded. "We will teach our children what happened. They will know who answered the call." Far from the city, the burned hive stood silent. Smoke still rose from its broken shell. The swarm had scattered after the queen fell. Some of the creatures still roamed in the wild, but without their leader, they were no longer an organized force. Human drones circled the area to watch for any movement. Varney scouts patrolled the old battlefields. The war was not fully over, but the enemy was no longer a rising storm. It was a fading shadow at the command center. Mira and her officers prepared for departure. The human fleet had already started loading their gear. Their mission was to respond to a plea for aid, not to stay as rulers. They had done what they came to do. Mira stood in front of a large map and gave quiet orders to her second-in-command. Every step was clear. No wasted words. No drawn-out celebrations. Tar walked into the room. "You are leaving." Mira nodded. "Yes, there are other calls." Other places that need us. Terran stepped closer. What if the swarm returns? Mira answered, then you will face them. You know how now. You will not be alone. You are Deathworlders now too. Her words were not loud, but they carried weight. Terran understood them. The humans were not saviors. They were fighters. They had shown Varnies that strength did not come from waiting for rescue. It came from standing up even when the world burned around you. Moran entered the room. She carried a small box. Inside it was a simple metal emblem, the symbol of Varnies' defense. She placed it on the table in front of Mira. This is a sign of our thanks. It is not gold. It is not a prize. It is a piece of our shield. You fought with us. You are part of our story now. Mira looked at the emblem for a long moment. She picked it up and placed it carefully in her pack. She gave a short nod. Thank you. On the landing field, the human ships stood ready. Their hulls still carried the marks of the war. Some plates were blackened by fire. Some parts were patched. They looked nothing like the shining fleets of the great empires, but they were the only ones who had answered the call. Around the field, crowds gathered to see them off. Ryan stood at the base of the ramp with Leo beside him. Terran and Miran came to them. Terran placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder. You have our respect. Ryan gave a small smile. You already had ours. Miran shook Leo's hand. You showed our people what courage looks like, Leo answered. We just did what we were trained to do. You fought harder than anyone I have ever seen. Mira appeared at the top of the ramp. She turned and looked at the crowd. She did not give a speech. She raised her hand in a simple salute. The crowd answered with the same gesture. No one needed words. Everyone understood. The engines roared to life. Dust rose around the landing field. One by one, the human ships lifted into the air. Their shadows passed over the city that had once begged for help. Now it stood strong. The people watched as the ships climbed higher into the sky. When they vanished among the stars, the crowd remained silent. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of respect. Days passed. The defenders rebuilt their homes. They cleared the streets and raised new walls. The council created a new command structure that mixed both old and new strategies. The Ironnet plan became a standard part of their defense. Every new soldier learned how the battle was won. The story spread beyond Varnies. Traders carried it to other systems. The message was simple. When the galaxy turned its back, the Deathworlders came. Ryan and Leo's names were carved on the stone of remembrance, along with many others. Terran's leadership became a lesson in strength. Mira's name was whispered across the stars, not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, as a fighter who answered a call no one else heard. Years later, on a cold night, Terran stood again on the balcony. The city had grown taller. New towers reached toward the stars. Ships from other worlds now docked at their ports. They came not to conquer, but to trade and learn. Varnies was no longer seen as a weak world. It was known as the world that survived the swarm. Moran joined him. Her hair carried streaks of silver now, but her eyes burned the same way they had on the battlefield. Do you ever wonder where they are now? She asked. Dotterin looked at the sky. Out there? Fighting somewhere? Helping someone else? Miran smiled. They never stay still. They do not need to, Terran replied, because their mark stays with us. In distant space, the human fleet flew through dark voids. New distress signals blinked on their screens. Mira stood on the bridge of her ship. She looked at the signals, then at her crew. We have work to do, her crew responded with a single word. Yes, the ships turned toward the new coordinates. They carried no banners. They carried no promise of power. They carried only the iron will of Deathworlders who answered calls no one else dared to face. On Varnies. The people gathered each year on the night of the great battle. They lit lanterns and told the story to their children. They spoke of the day when the swarm fell. They spoke of the humans who came when others turned away. They spoke of the iron net and the stand that changed their fate. The children would ask, why did they help us? The elders would answer, because they are Deathworlders. When no one else moves, they do. The story became part of their identity. It was carved into their songs. It was written on their walls. It was remembered in their hearts. The war had started with fear, but it ended with unity. Varney's had been weak, but now it was strong. The Kreth had believed they could crush everything. Instead, they had faced the storm of those who had lived with danger all their lives. They had faced Deathworlders, and when the next threat came from the stars, Varney's would not send a plea for help as a broken world. It would stand ready as an ally. It would stand as part of a growing legend. The Deathworlders had answered. And because they did, the galaxy would never be the same again.